ocean. It's been high in the past, up to 120 times higher, but 1,200 times higher. Now, what do you make of that?
Well, it's not good. You're right, Sanjay, that we've had reports in the last 24 hours, even prior to this one, that the levels were high in the ocean right around the plant. But, in relative terms, it is better that that radiation be in the ocean.
1,250 times higher.
Population centers. So, do we want excess radiation in the sea? No, we don't. But if you had to choose, you would choose it.
I would choose it to be inside of the containment.
Over time, and the oceans are big. And where it would
The ocean's big, yeah, sure. 1,250 times above
Just really quick, Jim.
legal limit, whatever that is.
Particles, the ground between the plants and the ocean. Given that the ocean is 1,200 times higher than normal, what about that ground in between? What assumptions can we make there?
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to wait and see. First of all, there's the question of what is the composition of that radiation. In other words, which isotopes? Iodine lasts, it's a half-life of 8 days. Cesium lasts longer. Other isotopes will last longer than that. So you really,
They keep lying to the public. Right, Gina?
All bad, all equally the same. You know and I know that that's not the case. It depends on the particular nature of it and how long it will last, the duration that it's exposed. But the more it is not exposed to humans, the better. So if it is out at ocean, that's definitely better than being in the land where it can be absorbed into groundwater, it can be absorbed into vegetables, it can be exposed to human beings. So again, do you want this to happen? No, but better out there than on land.
Michael, some of the other big news today, there are these containment structures around the core, and the concern seems to be that there's a breach of the containment structure allowing radioactive material from the core to leak out.
I believe there is if you look at Japanese TV.
The hydrogen explosions that we heard about a week ago were occurring. But what does this mean to you? I mean, does this make it more likely that it's going to be difficult to bring this situation under control?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of points. Number one, we have a relatively high degree of certainty now, given the events of the last couple of weeks, that the reactor fuel pins themselves, to a greater or lesser degree, have been compromised. Now, we don't know exactly the nature, but we know that much of the radioactive iodine, as Jim Walsh was just mentioning, in the radioactive cesium, indeed has come from those fuel pins that were breached over the events of the last 2 weeks. But more importantly, and I think this
don't
is
even know
really
what to say.
we know the Nuclear Industry Safety Agency of the Japanese government yesterday put out a very well-written document that gave us some very precise information regarding the water that those guys stepped in. Now, the nice thing about nuclear materials is that each individual component has a very distinctive fingerprint, and it allows us to go back and identify the source of that radioactive water. And indeed, the information that the NISA put out yesterday, that radioactive water did not come from containment. It most likely came from one of the auxiliary systems that's in the turbine building.
Okay, more lies.
Normal plant operations. It was probably damaged during the earthquake.
So I guess that's potentially a little bit of good news there. But Michael, let me ask you. I was reading that there were 3 workers. They stepped in this water. This is almost going to sound a little silly, but one of the guys had higher boots, and therefore the water did not seep into his boots. The other 2 guys' boots were lower. I mean, I would assume that the type of protective gear that they're wearing would be a lot more complete and consistent than that. That almost sounds a little bit ridiculous. I mean, is that what you're hearing, and how could that happen?
Yeah, you know what? This is, for me, one of the, besides the issue of the radioactive contamination working into the food chain, the number one concern that I have with regard to how this whole incident is playing out is exactly these type of topics in terms of the overall management of the crisis and the decisions that are being made. Moments ago, the NHK news agency, which is the English-speaking news agency in Japan, put out a release that basically said that they were scolding, that the NISA was scolding TEPCO specifically because they had improperly done radiological surveys in this area before sending people to work. So I take the report that you just mentioned where some of the individuals were indeed not properly protected, and it causes me to have a bit of concern with regard to how the overall very, very difficult issues are being managed. And don't forget, we're getting ready to move into an evolution where we are about to start taking large quantities of very radioactive water and moving them outside of containment. I'm worried about this.
It is unbelievable.
You're
I think to a
ruining
lot
the
of people.
planet
Jim,
while
did you
you're
have
at it.
something to add to that?
No, I agree with Michael. We continue to face, the workers continue to face the greatest risks, right? They're the ones who are on the front line. Most of the radiation is going to be in that area immediately around the plant. Yes, it will float